looking at how to create somewhat custom textures. So this is an image that should be able to download off Blackboard, and you probably already did under the Photoshop images last week. So basically I want to run through tiling this so that when you use it for one of your materials, it doesn't show the tiles. I don't know if anybody's ever kind of explored much with the materials in Revit or any other rendering software. It basically repeats that pattern over and over again, and you can get it just kind of looks really funky. And so in Photoshop you can basically start creating a material library that has materials that are seamless. So basically when they tile, the tiling doesn't actually show up, and so you won't see those lines. So this morning I'd like to spend about 15 minutes working on this one, and then kind of do an open 15-minute lab to let you guys kind of experiment with it, and then we'll spend the rest of the 45 minutes working through project 2 and the layers and stuff that's associated with that. So if you don't have this up yet, just kind of sit back and watch, and hopefully I'll get through it in about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll go till 9 working in kind of a lab. But basically I downloaded this off that cgtextures.com. It's a great resource. It's a fairly large image, but when you go to adjust the image size, you'll notice that it's only resolution is only 72 pixels. I'm going to resample it to 30 pixels or 300 pixels so that it's a 10 by 7 inch. And this isn't losing resolution. If we resampled that, we'd lose some resolution when we went to bring it back down. So those are kind of two different ways you could do that. But so we could resample the image and make it 300 pixels and then scale it back down to make it a larger image, but that's not really our intent for today. We don't really want to make it a larger image, we just want to make it a seamless tile image. So we want it at a really high resolution as well. So if you notice, it doesn't quite evenly meet up. Like if you look at this edge compared to this edge, if it started to tile across the page, you'd see a distinct line there, and it would look pretty uneven and funky. Same with the bottom. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to crop this to make a fairly even on all sides. And then once we do that, we'll use a filter to move the image left and right so that we can rubber stamp some material over those seams. So the first thing I'm going to do is utilize the crop tool, which is the 4th one down here, and I'm just going to crop this thing down, and I think I'm just going to kind of line it up with a couple of the seams that work well. And Ryan's already shaking his head because I do it differently than what you were taught. There's nothing wrong with it. So I'm going to crop this down. I'm going to make it a layer. I'm going to double click on that to make it a layer, and then I'm going to go through and I'm going to offset with a filter, offset filter other, and it's offset. And what that allows us to do is offset the image. And so what it looks like is there's a pretty uneven seam here where we've got the tiling effect happening in the same location. And also in this area. So I just want to kind of get those centered on the image. Which way am I going here? I like to do it at the same time. So at any rate, I have them kind of centered. This actually might prove to be a little difficult in this area to get this to line up, but we're going to try to get it to work. I'm going to click OK, and now I can utilize this clone stamp tool. Oops. And I'm going to reduce my brush size a little bit. And I kind of like to have it on one of these brushes that are with a low hardness, so it's just kind of fades out. And basically, if we use the Alt key, it allows us to select a seam, right? And then we can clone stamp that over areas that don't look right. And so we're basically eliminating that awkward seam. And then we can also do that with this as well. So I actually don't particularly like how that's laid out. It's kind of a poor choice of where I cropped it. I might just try and undo that. Whoops. Let's see if I might have to start over to get a better seam there. Okay. There we go. So this is offset from this top one. Let's just utilize a small sample here. And make that a layer. And go down to Other in my filters and offset. That's hideous. But we're going to clean this up. So, oops, clone stamp. Now we want to go I'm not doing a very good job at this morning. Screwed up a little bit, I know. But that's starting to look okay.
You guys understand it.
Yeah, you guys get the concept, right? Sometimes it takes a little practice to get it adjusted correctly for whatever particular image you're using. And it doesn't necessarily work the first time right off the bat. So as you can see, it's not working for me off the bat. But yes, I will. But I want to give them an example of what it could look like, because I'm obviously not doing a very good job at the moment. So this is kind of an end product if you do it carefully enough, right? Where you have a pretty good seamless effort here. And if I put the filter tool offset on this one and moved it around, you really don't notice those seams as much in this. A little bit, but not much. It would look good on a render. Yeah. So now that we have this, we want to make it a bit larger so that when it applies to whatever material we're doing, we don't have to like change the size of it to get it to kind of map correctly. And so the bigger you make this image at 300 dpi, the better it'll cover whatever surface you've got going on. And it could be, you know, this could be a fabric, right? It doesn't have to be necessarily a roof. So when you start to, you know, put a material on a particular object that's rounded or has a lot of curves and stuff, that tiling effect is really noticeable. But when you make that, you know, and so there's options to, right, increase the size of the image, but as you do that, you lose DPI resolution. And so this is already 300 pixels. And so we can increase the canvas size of this image. And I'm going to do it fairly small because I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. But you could make this 3 feet by 3 feet, or why? Why?
Gives you an exact pattern and you're not changing the size at all.
I'm just going to do it by inches.
Okay.
You could do it by percent. You could do it by whatever you want here. I'm just going to do it by inches. I'm going to do 12-inch by 12-inch panel, which is just a 1 foot by 1 foot. If you were to, you would want to do this larger, realistically, than a 1 foot by 1 foot. But now that it's fairly seamless, don't give me that eyeball. We can start to repeat this pattern, right? And maybe select all of them and duplicate them and bring it down and duplicate again. Maybe we'll just crop this little section off here. And so once we have a pattern that's starting to look good, and you know, you can adjust it a bit, each one of these to make it really seamless, we can then select all of these layers and merge them together and do one final offset. And maybe that, you know, clean up this, clone stamp this a bit, and wherever else we feel you feel necessary that the pattern doesn't quite look right. So at any rate, that is how you do seamless textures. Anybody have any questions about that? Nice. So I explained it so well. Any rate, let's spend the next few minutes just having everybody do that if you haven't been. So after you get done fixing your seams with, yeah, that just offsets it a bit. With your offset tool on, right, and go ahead and use the snipping tool for Windows or print screen for Apple, and save that image, and you're going to upload it to an in-class assignment that I'll post later on this afternoon for 5 bonus points. Okay? Yeah.
Do you want, like, in the screenshot, do you want the layers in it?
You could include the layers if you want to. Yeah, if you merge the layers, you're only going to have one layer. But if you want to make like a layer adjustment to it, that'd be cool too. So like if you wanted to add a brightness contrast layer to it, you know, maybe darken it up a little bit, bump the contrast. So yeah, if you want to include those, that'd be great too. Just turn this thing back on and create a snapshot. And save it and then upload it to Blackboard. Okay, so let's move on. I'm basically just going to run through kind of what we want to see out of this perspective render image. Let me open up the assignment grading template just so that you kind of see what we're going to be looking at for grading. But basically, there's going to be 3 different kind of sections: the background, the render itself, and then the foreground. And so we're definitely looking for, you know, some layer adjustments, blending and hue saturation changes on all your layers. And so I believe the assignment sheet talks about doing a save as, saving the image and uploading that, but then also doing a print screen similar to what I just showed, showing all your layers that you've used. I don't want the Photoshop file itself uploaded to Blackboard. It'll be fairly large, and it probably won't even upload to Blackboard. So it's 2 images. One is the finished product image, and the other is an image of your layers, basically, which will be here once we create them. And there'll be a fair amount of them. So you may want to close out some of these other tabs when you go to do that, and open this up as wide as you can. And the organization is important, so, you know, adding these different file folders, and basically organization is fairly key to just keeping everything in line. And so we're going to want to see kind of all this stuff opened up. If it doesn't fit all on the screen, I think I would probably do a print screen of what it shows and then scroll down and do a second print screen so that we get to see all of the layers and not just like a portion of them, because it's fairly important to know that we've done all these layer adjustments to all of them. Okay, so with that, we're going to start into recreating this. And it doesn't have to be exact, you know. Everybody's eye is a little bit different, so the coloring of the trees and things might look slightly different. So this is the original render image that we're supposed to kind of duplicate, but you know, not everybody's going to get all this stuff looking exactly the same, but the concepts that we want to get across is utilizing adjustment layers and utilizing different blending modes. And so that's the real exercise, and that's why it's important to have an image of what layers you actually used, so that we can grade upon that, not necessarily what the image outcome looks like. I would try to get it as close as possible, but it doesn't have to be exact. So with that, let's start out fresh. So my first kind of step, I think, as far as organization, is to create 3 folders, one being the background, one being the image itself, and then an additional foreground folder. And to create new folders in your layer management system, it's right here. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like the 5th one in from the left, or the 3rd one in from the right on the layers tab here. And I'm just going to create 3 groups, and I can go ahead and rename them by double clicking. And the bottom one is going to be the background. The middle one will be the image itself, if I can spell. And then the top one will be the foreground. And the reason why I'm putting them in this specific order is because basically the layer that's on the bottom of this chain, right, is in the very furthest back of the image, and as you stack layers on top of it, those layers literally are on top. And so so the background we want on the bottom because it's in the back, the image we want in the middle because it's kind of in the middle, right? The base image is kind of in the middle, and the foreground will be in front of this image. So this particular layer, which I can call base image, is actually going to be placed, and I can drag it and put it inside this folder so that when I collapse it, it's in that folder. And so I'm going to start kind of in the middle and then go to the background and then come back to the foreground. We'll probably not get to the foreground today, and we may not get all the way through the background either, but you'll have and so on Thursday we'll polish this up, doing probably the foreground on Thursday, but at any rate, so the base image is fairly dark, and so we can start to use a couple adjustment layers to lighten that up. And again, it's all going to be kind of based on your own eye. So I'm going to go ahead and get my adjustments back here so that my layer adjustments, so I can easily select on them. But the first thing I want to do is kind of use a brightness and contrast adjustment, and that allows me to brighten up the image or darken it depending on what you like. And so I'm just gonna start to play around with this a bit until I get to something that I think looks fairly good. It kind of pops and maybe becomes the focal at this point of the image. I'm not too concerned about this stamp at the moment. We're probably not going to manipulate that much at all. And obviously when you go to Photoshop or process your images, that kind of stuff won't be in there. But for the assignment, it's basically so you guys just don't turn in that after image that I gave you guys as your own. So at any rate, I think that's looking fairly reasonable. And the other thing that I want to do is I want to create a clipping mask so that, and that's right-clicking on the layer itself here in the layer tab and creating a clipping mask. And what that does is it says we're only going to apply this brightness contrast to this layer that's underneath it. So as we build more layers, if this wasn't on, this would apply to any layers that fall underneath it, but because we've made a clipping mask, it only applies to this one particular layer, which is the base image itself. A couple other things that I want to kind of address is these windows here. They're fairly yellow, and I think I want to make them a little bit more white and reflective, similar to this image. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to select my base image and I'm going to utilize my quick select tool, which is the magic wand marquee tool. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit, Control plus, space bar pans once you scroll in, and we can go ahead and select that gold area, and I can Control C, Control V to basically make that its own separate layer. Now if I turn it off, I didn't actually delete it from the background base image, I just copied over it. And so I'm going to release the clipping mask and move it above this brightness contrast. And maybe I could have done that first and reapply the clipping mask to the original image. But now we can adjust another brightness contrast. Whoops, and you can see that I didn't do a clipping mask, so I need to do that, and now it applies strictly to this area, and I can start to brighten that up a bit. So it's starting to match kind of these white areas in here a little bit. So it just lightens that up a little bit. We could also probably put a hue and saturation layer on it and also create a clipping mask. So you can have multiple adjustments to one layer. As long as it's a clipping mask, it applies to this specific layer. So even though this says it's applying to the layer below it, it's actually applying to the actual image layer itself. And so you can see as I adjust the saturation, it gets more yellow. As I reduce the saturation, it gets more white. Lightness as well, we can adjust a little bit there. And so the other thing is we can rename this layer to be Windows, so that we know that that's that's the windows, more or less. So the next step is to go ahead, and we have this background here that we need to kind of crop out, because when we go to start placing trees and they'll be behind this layer, they'll be hidden by this extra landscape here, and we don't necessarily want that. So if we go back to our base image and utilize, let's try utilizing the quick select tool. It might work out for us here. And it didn't really work the way that I really wanted it to. So I'm going to press Control D to deselect that, and I'm going to utilize my polygon lasso tool, and I'm just going to come in here and trace this outline. Whoops. And if you kind of screw up, you'll have to more or less start over with you know, where you selected, if you misselect a particular spot.
Control Z will undo one time. Control Z twice will take the other way out. Should.
Well, it doesn't do that with the clipping tool. And it doesn't do it when you're in this tool.
Control. Click.
Doesn't do it. Huh?
Just hold the control key down and click. It'll automatically close.
But I don't want it to do that, Ryan. Now I have to start over again. So please just put this down. Okay. So I've got one sort of looking pretty good, and I can pan over, and with my add to the marquee tool selected here, you can go ahead and select the other side as well. I'm going to Control minus so that I can zoom back out again. So we've got both of these selected, and instead of deleting them, I'm going to basically create a clipping mask, adding a layer mask to this base image. And so if I hit this little square with the round circle on it, let's yeah, that's gonna do it initially. So I'm gonna actually select the inverse. Yeah, so if you create the layer mask first and then do the marquee tool selecting what you want, you can use the black fill to fill that in, or if you did it the way that I did, you can select the inverse of what you selected, and then it takes away what you don't want to keep. Does that make sense at all? Or should I redo that? Redo it? Okay, so there's two ways we can do this. The first way is I'm going to have everything unselected, and I'm going to create a layer clipping mask, which is this square button with the left with a little white circle in it. Under my layers tab, it says add vector mask now, but it's a layer mask thumbnail, and that's highlighted here. And so once I have that created, I can go in. Whoa, stop moving. And with the marquee tool, select the area that I want to remove. Right? And let's just do the one for now. And we can use the fill tool with black, and that makes that transparent, and so it disappears and goes away. So similar to our layer blending modes where black is transparent and white is not. So if I hit X and switched to my white color and filled that back in, that landscape will come back. So I'm not actually deleting it, I'm just hiding it. So it didn't actually get deleted from this layer, it's being hidden. And so we can go ahead and do it to the other side as well. And fill this in with black. So when you're using a layer mask on the layer itself, only black and white work. Black is transparent, it makes whatever you've selected transparent, or white brings the color of the image back. Okay? So that's one way to do it. The other way is what I showed initially, was I selected these this area first, and then took my selection and made it the inverse of what I actually selected. And so it's selecting everything but the areas that I had selected. And when you go to create a layer mask, it says, oh, I understand that you're trying to hide something, and so whatever's not selected, we're going to hide it. Okay, so another couple of things that we can do here is we can start to utilize a blending mode to add a little more depth and shadow to this image. So we've got some ambient shadow here, but this is kind of looking a little funky, you know, this down here. And there's not a lot of shadow going on. We can add a little more depth to that. So what I'm going to do is create a new layer, and I'm also going to duplicate these two hue, saturation. Or no, wait, I'm on the wrong one. I'm going to duplicate this brightness contrast layer that we have on the original base layer. And so I'm just going to right click and duplicate that layer. And I want to move it up and create a clipping mask on this blank layer. And what we're going to utilize or do is, if I double click, it adds effects. We're not going to talk about that today. Is I can utilize the rubber stamp tool that we just talked about. And I'm going to make my brush fairly small, and I'm going to select this, and then I'm going to switch to my other layer, and I can start to draw and hide that layer. And that's not working exactly the way that I want it to. So let's try that Alt again. Maybe just right in there, switch to my other layer, and touch that up. And we'll have to continue kind of back and forth so that we don't go too far and it starts putting that black stuff back on. So basically, as I move this, you see that little plus sign? It's copying from the other layer this area. So as I continue to move this over, it's going to start to pick up these black lines again. And so that's why I'm kind of stopping at a point and repeating that process to kind of just keep pushing that over a little bit. And then we can go ahead and grab a little bit from up here and put this and start kind of eliminating that. And so initially it looks fairly terrible, but I'm going to rename that so I know that it's something different here, as the what is that? What do we want to call that, Ryan? Yeah, your lips are sealed now. Good. Well, to save time, I'm not going to name it because I can't think of something. Where'd that go? So we've kind of cleaned up that area a bit, but it's still not quite right, and we want to add some extra shadows, ambient shadows. And so I'm going to use my paintbrush tool, and I'm going to change my blending layer to multiply, and I'm going to reduce my brush opacity. 15% sounds pretty good, and I want black on, and so I can start to airbrush in and kind of blend that back in, right? And then we can also start to apply extra shadows in areas that would likely be, you know, where you'd likely see those shadows. Whoops. And so, you know, underneath here a little bit, around the edges of this box, down and around here, maybe up underneath these roof eaves, start to see a little more shadow. Maybe down at the ground level here. And so as we turn those on and off, you can see the difference that it makes in the image itself. And I'm just going to name that layer shadows. Maybe ambient shadows would be appropriate. So that's kind of a good start to the base image itself. Let's kind of look at the background image. And so I'm going to go ahead and open those entourage layers. I'm going to first do the sunset, the sky. I'm going to open that up. And if we look at our image size right now, it's at 100 DPI, and our mode is 16-bit. And so if we just drag this in, right, to this, it's going to give me a warning that says that there's something different. And what's that is saying actually is that if we look at this image, its mode is 8-bit, so we can change it to 16-bit so we don't get that warning. And the image size we can change to 100 so that the pixels are the same. And as we drag that in, we don't get a warning anymore. And I want to move this into the background.
What was the part right before you changed the resolution size?
The bit changed it from 8-bit to 16-bit under the image mode.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And this image is a lot more orange than I would like it to be. I kind of want it to blend into the background a little bit. So I just Control-T and zoomed it up a little bit, made it a little larger. But we can apply a hue and saturation adjustment to it. And again, create a clipping mask. And we can start to desaturate this image so that it's not so bright in color. And you can play with these adjustments and see what they do, but you can lighten it up a bit to make it a little grayer. You could start to change the actual color of it, but I don't really think that needs to happen. So at any rate, you can play with that later on to get it to your suiting or liking. I'm just going to leave it there, but know that that's kind of what you want to do is with the layer adjustments. So that's kind of playing into the background. This is still looking pretty good. Maybe we could adjust the contrast of it a bit more. I don't know. I think it looked probably all right. At any rate, now we can open up a tree. So I'm going to go open, and I think I'm going to first start with that large tree. And again, I want to make sure that my bit mode is 16-bit, similar to the image that I'm starting out with. And the size of it, let's just adjust it so that it's 100 pixels as well. And so I can drag this in and go ahead and close that image. And you can see that it comes in quite large. It's bigger than we need it to be, and it's a lot greener than you might want it. And so I'm just going to make it a bit smaller for now. And we can again apply a hue and saturation to this. And let me double check here and just see. Come down to my tree layers. Yeah, so a multiplier and a darken. Multiplier and a darken. We can start to add some layer blending modes to our hue and saturation that's affecting. I want to create a clipping mask so it's not affecting the background image. So it's only affecting the tree layer, and then as we start to change this, the hue and saturation, we can start to have different effects. And so, you know, if you kind of cycle through these layer modes, you'll see the difference in what those effects do. I know that's pretty dramatic. Maybe it's taking away from the overall image, or it's adding to it, but you can kind of play with these settings to make them the way that you want them to look. I'm going to stick with those two, and I'm going to change my saturation so it's just a bit darker, kind of starts to blend into the background a little bit, maybe add a little bit of color to it. I guess as I'm changing the lightness from black to white, notice black, it's changing the color itself, but it's also kind of transparent as well, which is interesting. But at any rate, can go ahead and adjust that tree to being somewhat similar to this one back here. Click enter. And in my, I'm going to add an additional group here and call those trees, and dump those into that folder. And so it's a subfolder within the folder, just to keep this kind of straight. And I don't like, you could merge these layers and collapse them down, but for to save room in here. But I'd like you to not do that, so that when you give me the picture of your layers, that I can tell that you made these layer adjustments. Okay, to save space, you could collapse them, but in this particular instance, I don't want you to. So you can select both of them and duplicate to create an additional tree, and we can make it bigger. And I'm going to move it down just a bit so it's behind the other tree. And so once we kind of have got the tree looking the way that we want it to, we can just keep duplicating this guy. I think that's it for, there's a couple more here, but for now let's kind of work on these other couple of trees. And so we go to File, Open, and grab maybe the spruce tree, open up that file. This one, the tree is not separate. It's not, there's a background to it, so we have to create a layer and select the white. And just to make sure that we have it all, we can right click and say Select Similar to get all these little white spots in here. And we can just go ahead and delete the background out of that image. And Control D deselects. And we go back up to our image mode. Again, change it to 16-bit. And our size is actually bigger than our 100 pixels. So we can drop that into our file. I don't know where it went. Yeah. Oh, it's a clipping mask. Release the clipping mask. There it is. So if you happen to not see it as you come in, make sure that there's no like little arrow associated to it, because if it's a clipping mask, then it may not show. So I'm just going to shrink this tree down a bit. We might want a couple of these trees in this corner. So I'm not really worried yet about the gap between this ground and this ground, because once we create those trees, then we'll go back in. I don't have a lot of time left, but we'll go back in and basically create a new layer and then utilize the clone stamp, right, to add more of that grass texture back in that corner to kind of fill in the gaps where we don't want to see the sky background. And just to kind of keep it straight, I'm going to do a subfolder within the subfolder, and I'm going to take the trees that I just made and I'm going to select those layers and put them in an additional group. And I'm just going to call this deciduous 1. Probably not spelled right. I'm not really worried at the moment. But so you can see, you can start to organize your layers so that you don't get mixed up of what layers what. And so layer management is pretty essential once you get into Photoshop here. And so again, we can add a hue and saturation layer, maybe changing our blending modes here, and we can start to create a clipping mask so that it's only affecting the layer right below it. And once you have something that you start to like, we can go ahead and duplicate that, and maybe can use the scale, Control-T, to scale that up and make one that's a little bit bigger. So we've got some depth into the image. And so you can repeat this process kind of on the other side and with that other tree. So there's another tree here that you can utilize. Make sure that it's, again, similar in pixel size and bit to the original image. That's looking fairly good. Whoops. Gonna make a clipping mask so that it's only affecting that tree. So that's kind of a good start to how to create this image. Let's go into doing some rubber stamping to create kind of the grass back into here and a little bit over here in the last 5 minutes. So I'm going to go back to my image area, kind of the mid-ground, and pretty much want to create a new layer, and I think I'm going to do it below my shadows but above all my other layers. I'm going to So I'm going to highlight the layer that I want the new layer to appear above, and I'm going to click this little button here, which is right next to the garbage can on your layer properties tab here. I'm going to create a new layer, and then I'm going to zoom in I kind of like doing it this way better, but I'll show you this particular way first, and then maybe I'll do a second if I can. So I'm going to select an area here with my blending, my rubber stamp tool, switch back to that layer, and we can start to brush in. And then Control T to probably scale that back a little bit. We might need to apply some additional layers to this, but I can start duplicating this and to create a larger texture. Maybe do a layer mask, and I want to change my drawing tool back to normal, and let's see where I'm at here with my brush size. And my brush has disappeared, but it's really large, and so I want to probably bring that back to being fairly small. And I can start to blend the base of this in to the other grass. So I have a reduced opacity, and I'm just painting the transparent, black in here. And I can bump up this opacity here to start to hide that. And I guess if we wanted to you can start to get a fairly clean edge that way, or once you're satisfied with that, we can select those layers and merge them together. And then we could have just used the erase tool to get that edge fairly clean as well. But the blending was more important down in here, and I've got opacity turned on too high. But and then we can apply, we can lighten that grass up a little bit, desaturate it. And again, use a clipping mask so that we're only adjusting this image. And that looks pretty terrible. So we can start to also add highlights to it as well, to make it a little bit better. Create another image and utilize another color, with a blending tool or something, to come in here and add some highlights back into it. so it doesn't look as terrible as it first did. And then again, you can blend it back in with our, by clicking on this guy right here for the layer masking, and we can blend it into the background as well. So reduced opacity, just kind of start to erase that. Maybe you want to bump that opacity up just a little bit. Yeah.
Have you shown them you have two windows visible? That might be helpful, so they can compare as they're going.
Okay, so that's all we got